I will be joined today with some speakers who are known for their contribution in both education, child protection, and governance in Syria programming. So first, I will be joined by Qutayba Al-Khalil. Qutayba specializes in child protection, child safeguarding, safe programming, and capacity building. He has 8 years of experience in establishing and operating child and youth protection programs and developing child safeguarding systems. He mainly worked on protection in emergencies, early childhood development, social and emotional learning, resilience programs, and developing child safeguarding procedures and policies. Then we will have Haima, who's a feminist, human rights activist. She holds a master's degree in risk and security. She has been working in the sector of civil society since 2012. She's working for LDSPS and responsible for advocacy and communication. She's also a consultant with the Syrian Female Journalists Network. Then we will have Mr. Omar Shaban. I hope he will be able to join. He's joining from Syria. He's the current representative for Families of Children with Disabilities Committee. He is a remarkable and passionate advocate for the rights of children with disabilities and inclusive education. And last but not least, we will have Maimouna Al-Ammar, who's a non-violent activist who has more than 9 years experience in social work. I've had the pleasure of working with her in Hurras network for the last 8-9 years. She has a proven track of record as a human rights defender. She's a mother of 2 and currently completing a master's degree in childhood in society as an education studies. Without any delays, let me start with the questions for our panelists. And then afterwards, if you have any questions, you can either ask them through the Q&A mechanism in Zoom, or write them on the chat so our panelists can have the chance to answer them either during their interventions or at the end of this webinar. So if I start with you, Qutayba, as you know, today when we talk to donors, most concerns are raised around funding and the lack of funding, especially now, like last year, the UK government cut their funding, or the UN allocations were cut in half almost. But again, in your opinion, when we're talking about education, what are challenges that are facing education in Northwest Syria? It would be great if you can help us understand challenges that are related to the response models in education in emergencies. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Riyadh, and hello, everyone, and thanks for having me in this session. So it's good, Riyadh, that you asked me to talk about other challenges than the funding, because for so many times the challenge might be about how we employ the available funds, not only about how we secure more funds. And this leads me to talk about the first challenge, which is the equitable opportunities for all the children in Northwest Syria. Where I encourage the donors and the decision makers and the NGOs to look at the education in Northwest Syria holistically as an education sector, not a project-based interventions. And to explain the idea, I will give you a real example. During the 2022 school's winter response, some organization distributed heating fuel only for the schools which they support. And therefore, each organization was looking only at the needs of their schools, which is something good. But at the same time, there were about 150 non-supported schools run by non-supported teachers with no support by any actor and of course no fuel. The question was at that moment, who will warm the children in these schools? Especially that there were some supported schools received quantities of fuel more than the daily rate they need, which is 3 liters per day for each classroom. And then we ended up having some supported schools stored more than they need and non-supported schools in the same local community and at the next door of the supported schools with no fuel. This is an example of inequitable distribution of the resources among the children. And the second challenge is related to the accountability to the affected population and their actual participation in the decision making and choosing the appropriate design and activities for their children. For example, according to the research conducted by the ACU, 70% of the caregivers in Northwest Syria prefer the utilization of the modified Syria curriculum in the schools, while only 1% of them reported that they prefer the utilization of the curriculum B in the schools. However, most of the organization utilized the curriculum B in the schools, which is the caregivers do not want. So I believe it becomes very important to increase the level of the community participation from the feedback sharing to reach the point of the decision making. And I will finish here with the third challenge or need that has begun to appear recently, which is the transition from an emergency response approach to the medium and long-term intervention approach, which is the bridging stage between the emergency phase and the early recovery phase. In this transition or in the transition stage or phase, we should focus more on learning outcomes, the child resilience, the efficiency of the education systems, and the sustainability of our interventions, and of course, the local leadership for the education sector. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Qutaiba. I think it's really important to start thinking about more sustainable ways. As you have mentioned, we're moving out of the emergency phase towards an early recovery one, and like more sustainable systems are like now needed more than any time ever. Maybe if I can take this to you, Haima. As we've heard from Qutaiba, like he mentioned, the short-term based response, like it remains a challenge for us in education system. And I know that you have been working on the governance side of things for quite a long time now. Can you share your insights about this, like what kind of principles, approaches, mechanisms we may be using in the future to help us like ensure more sustainability and better response in the educational system?
Yeah, thank you, Riyadh. And I, of course, totally agree with Qutaiba about the need of shifting from the emergency response into a longer term approach in their developing a sector very vital like education. So basically what we've been experimenting lately is a model or a mechanism that is built basically on the involvement of the stakeholders, affected community, and it's a right-based approach that put the right holders in the center. Um, this approach or mechanism taken into account that is that it is open to the communities to participate and engage in the planning and decision-making processes of the education and child protection sectors through engaging families or parents of the students and representative unions / leagues or civil society organizations supporting or interested in these both sectors. And it's also based on human rights conditionality. So we've been experimenting this by calling for a series of workshops and meetings with these components to put the policies of the education sector. But for this phase, the workshops were around putting a plan for the education sector, and especially for the second term of the school year of 2022. It included, as I mentioned, teacher union, student parents unions, and as well as the technical education directorates in this area, in the greater Idlib area. And some experts in education, child protection, and gender equality as well. So the model aims at putting more strategic goals for the education sector in this concerned area, and somehow figure out together in a participatory methods and mechanism and equitable standards or values for the sector, and to have maybe also in the future follow-up or monitoring mechanisms by the affected community, by the right holders themselves, to monitor the processes of the education sector, each from its position and specialization, of course.
Thank you so much, Haima. It's really good to hear about like efforts towards like finding a more unified and holistic approach towards education. But maybe let me go back here to Taiba and ask you, do you think that like the principles or the approaches, the module that Haima mentioned here would address the challenges that you've highlighted? As you know, and working like on education, I know that like one of the main concerns of donors is about the governance and the control of the educational system in Northwest Syria. So do you think that models like the model that Haima mentioned would ensure the education integrity, or do you think we need to look at some more innovative approaches?
Yeah, yes, and more. But first of all, thanks, Haima, for sharing and for talking about the mechanism or the example or the model that we have right now for the education. So I wanted to clarify a little bit about the education from the model from the education perspective. So the model that we are applying now was a result of applying the political economy analysis to identify the actors of the Syria education program targeted community, which consists of the teachers, caregivers, and children. And that was to determine the real representatives of these groups. In addition, of course, to the some representatives of the small groups or the marginalized groups, such as children with disabilities or girls. When we identified the main actors in our targeted community, we gave them the opportunity and the technical support to be organized and to form representative structures for each group. All the groups should be specialized in one of the aspects of the education domains, independent and run with good governance. Examples of these representative structures: the teacher union, the Children with Disability Association, the protection committees, some local NGOs, assembly education instructors, and education directorate. So these structures or local bodies develop a mechanism for coordination and communication among them. And as a result of their coordination, they produced a unified education strategy for Northwest Syria based on principles of localization, community participation, inclusion, safeguarding, and relevancy. The Syria Education Program, or Manaha program, the program that I work with, has adopted this strategy as a guide to identify the interventions that we must support from our side in order to achieve the Syria Education Program objectives and their strategy. And at the same time, these groups together, they set a communication routine to monitor the progress of their strategy and also to advocate for it. This mechanism or the processes had so many benefits. For example, the education decisions are made collectively and based on specialized technical functions. The activities are more relevant and the risks are assessed by the representatives of the beneficiaries. We have got more holistic approach to all aspects of the education sector that meets the needs of teachers, caregivers, and of course the children. In addition to that, the presence of many community-based organizations and local structures in the decision-making place has greatly expanded the base of resistance to any external interference or attempt to politicize the education services. Over from my side.
Thank you so much. It's quite interesting to hear about such an innovative approach. And I see that the discussion is going towards this area. So maybe we can continue to discuss the discussion about it. And here, let me ask Maimouna. Maimouna, as a child rights advocate, and hearing the discussion now between Qutaiba and Haima about this innovative model, what do you think is the importance of such model for children in Syria today? What difference would it make to their education and protection in their everyday life?
Yes, thank you, Riyad, and for Qutaiba and Haima for the great highlights. From a child protection perspective, we can notice that numbers of out-of-school children last year of more than 800,000 children were shockingly bigger than those in the previous year of 500,000. Should we ask why? We think this raises many questions about education interventions in the area. After 11 years, the Syrian response has delivered humanitarian aid to over 6 million people. The authentic right of proper education, however, wasn't well considered and prioritized in the response agenda, despite continued support to various forms of education in emergencies. Dangers resulting from being out of school are still overshadowing the deterioration of education system, and lack of education opportunities has left Syrian children and adolescents vulnerable to early or forced marriage, militarization, and child labor. Education is still a concern which touches the heart and mind of every single mother and father, Syrian mother and father. They need to support their children's positive identity development in a changing context. They need to make sure their children have access to safe places where they can learn, socialize, and feel a sense of normalcy. This cannot be achieved without a return to a sustainable form of education. In the past years, we at Hurras Network addressed drop out of school cases and facilitated children's return to schools through accelerated and catch-up programs in correlation with PSS programs. However, Standalone and temporary solutions are not enough. Without a structured educational approach, protection efforts alone will not be sufficient to address the needs of this generation and create opportunities for a better future. We need to seek more sustainable and multi-sectorial solutions. Emergency education interventions were suitable in the first years, followed displacement waves, but for hundreds of thousands of children who have been settled in the North for more than 5 years now, this is exactly against normalcy. This doesn't meet children and parents' needs for certainty, stability, and safety, or the hope in a better future. Faithful efforts alone are insufficient to success. They must be guided to the right direction and followed by the right actions. Investment in education mustn't be only increased, but also be focused in the best place. The model they suggested exemplifies an advancement to prior interventions, as it is grounded on the need of affected people, and based on the foundation of community participation and coordination and analysis standards, which we at Hurras Network had the chance to touch its efficiency through working a similar model and protection with the child protection community committees. Non-formal education interventions has already opened horizons of hope for affected children, limiting barriers to return to formal education. As this prolonged crisis enters its 12th year, it is more urgent than ever to give children their fair chance at a sustainable education. Such education has the potential to address impacts of war in children and help in early recovery, as well as contribute in preventing future crises. Transitioning children into the formal system necessitates longer-term investment in infrastructure and governance, and I invite you all to reach out and contribute to opening those horizons wide. Thank you. Over to you, Riyad.
Thank you so much, Maimuna. It's what you've highlighted is really important, and we need to keep it in mind when we design and implement programming in Syria, and especially for donors also to start thinking about this shift between the old approach and what we really need during this period of time. I wanted to also ask some questions for Mr. Omar, but I think he's not with us. Unfortunately, he's joining from Syria, and you know how challenging sometimes it can be to connect. But I want to highlight here that for Brussels, side events and other things, it's really important to hear directly from heroes who are working on the front line, who are really touching the real needs and the everyday struggle. And this is what we've tried to do here, but unfortunately we weren't lucky enough. And I hope that Brussels organizers would have like more luck than we do in giving the chance for those people to talk on behalf of Syrians. So let me here go back to you, Haima. And my question here, like talking about this approach that is really like represent what localization may mean, like having specialized people from every component of the community. We're talking about specialized organizations. We're talking about parents, teachers, and other education mechanisms in the community. So it's quite like localized. Do you fear or have any concerns that such mechanisms, taking in consideration like the differences between the control areas. Like we have the Syrian government control areas, we have the northwest, northeast, and some other areas that they have like very localized context. Each one of them has its own mechanism. Like investing in such structures and models, do you see any chance that it may affect like having a one unified approach in the future for all of Syria? Or do you see that such model can be copied and re-implemented in another place within Syria?
Thank you, Riyadh. This is actually like a very serious concern. However, on the contrary, this mechanism or model has been designed to facilitate the expected or hoped for integration of these different education methods between the different Syrian geographies that are under a different status quo authorities. Unfortunately, of course, the education right now is not unified in Syria due to the status quo authorities and their agendas. But this model works so these different, I would say, puzzle pieces could somehow complement each other in the future. The idea of the model, the center, the core of this model is the community engagement. So it's putting the decision making in the hands of the local communities and the right holders in these communities. So they are engaged in, as I mentioned, the planning and the decision making processes in the sector. I would say the model is not only fit for only education sector. It could be, I would refrain from using copy word, but I would say any similar models that engage the local communities and put them in the center of the need assessment, in the priority settings, in the planning and putting strategies for any sector. It's actually the core of the values and standards that we are advocating for. It's a participatory method, I would say, that allow the communities to participate in the decision making and somehow would decrease the power or the control of the status quo authorities in the different geographies in Syria over this sector. So is it education or health or whatever, our aim is to decrease the power and control of these authorities and have more participatory mechanism participated and exercised by the community itself, based on good governance, as Qutaiba mentioned, and also on democratic, I'd say, tools and mechanism into, like, for example, electing these representatives, forming unions, associations, specialized groups that can participate in the decision making. Especially we were thinking about like Syria after when a political transition is achieved, that this model taken into account, that it is adopted, can of course ensure that the education is not politicized or not under the control of the ruling authorities.
Thank you so much, Haima. This is also really, really important to see like a core or a seed that can be grown into something that may answer for the education problems when it comes to decision making in not only Northwest Syria, but the mechanism, as you said, can be used to answer for each area on its own, and people would control how they would like to see things going and decision taking in their local contexts. let me here go back to Maimuna and ask about the teachers. Usually when we talk about education, we often and rightly so focus on children, but the teachers are maybe they come like in the second priority. When we're talking about such models, how do you see them improve the conditions of teachers to be able and empowered to serve or to better serve children and education?
Thanks, Riyad, for the question, the important one actually. As we know, teachers have been themselves victims of shelling targeting civilians objects, including schools. The ones who survived suffered the loss of and grief for their colleagues, forced displacement, and the misery of life in camps. The complete lack of income that forced many of them to quit teaching in order to pursue a living. Teachers comprise the underpinning pillars of those who are in charge of education and the window through which students see the world. The focus on providing support to them is extremely important. But how to support them? When we try to answer this, we go and listen to them. And here I will tell you a small story. Last winter, we organized a meeting with female head teachers of schools in Idlib and rural Aleppo to hear about teachers' working conditions and better understand their needs. The ladies were surprisingly inspiring and broke all the stereotypes we had in our minds. Each one of them had a powerful and empathic personality at the same time. Their speech was full of passion towards their work and about rescuing the future of children. They talked spontaneously about walking for long distances every day to attend the school, holding their infants as they didn't have the right of a maternity leave. Sacrificing portions of their salaries to support fellow volunteers was a duty in their consideration. They described many other heroic daily tasks as if they were ordinary things. This was telling the realities of 9,000 female teachers working in education, working for 10 years in silence, suffering in silence. In that day, we decided to work together so their voices are heard. After 1 month, the life of a Syrian teacher in the Northwest became one of the Guardian top stories. In addition, we involved teachers in several events and meetings where they were able to share their stories and their needs. The milestone moment came when we had the chance to participate in a very important and strategic meeting, which was attended by local NGOs working in education, representatives from the opposition government, and as well as representatives of local community committees. Discussions began, but female teacher issues was totally absent. Little was known about their suffering, as women who are about to give birth are not granted maternity leave. Her absence at birth is covered by deputizing only for several days until she gathered her strength and returns to work, delivering her lessons while her baby cries outside, often at the hand of the principal of the school, the same school. The teacher finds herself forced to live with this better reality, or she will lose her job, which is the only source of livelihood for her family. Discussions were raging strongly until it was interrupted with a question: what about maternity leaves? Silence followed suddenly, as if the hall was empty. Eyes were gazing, as if asking, do teachers give birth? The silence was interrupted by a question. Is it possible that there is no maternity leave? And this question was followed with a long discussion. On that particular day, we were able to change the lives of 9,000 working women in Northwest Syria, as the maternity leave law for Education workers was passed. This was a direct result from working within this mechanism. I hope I could answer your question, Riyad.
Yeah, loud and clear. Thank you very much. And it's really important to understand how, like, when we use such mechanisms and we focus on localization and community-led programming, real issues that the like affected populations are facing would emerge, and it would be like more visible and clear for both us who are working on the front line and for donors who for like sometimes seem that they are like taking decisions in capitals, not understanding what is really going on the field. So I'm really excited to hear about what you collectively have done. And I'm sure that the participants do share this excitement with me. But let me here go back to Taiba, and I think this would be my last question for you before your ending remarks in like some minutes. Can you tell us more about your vision as you all are Syrians on the front line of the humanitarian response? You tend to sometimes we all tend to focus on the now. What do we need now? What should we do? What problems are we facing? And we forget to think about the future. We forget to dream. And here, again, thinking about such models, can you share the vision for education sector in maybe 5 years from now? What would change? What would be new? What are the opportunities, the threats you may see coming in the next 5 years, if we are like lucky and you get the attention and support that is needed for such model?
Yeah, thank you, Riyad. So this time my answer will be short, but at the same time doable. And I will merge the both answers together. I will talk about the dream and also at the same time, it's kind of recommendation or final remarks from my side. So I dream of having a unified and leading long-term education strategy developed by the children, caregivers, teachers, and other local stakeholders, focuses on learning outcomes, the system building, sustainability, and inclusion, of course. And there is kind of conscious accountability to the representatives of the local communities, such as teacher union, parents groups, and children. And I am sure that my dream will come true. Thank you, Riyad.
Thank you, Taiba. I hope, and I know we're doing, like, we're waking up every day, going to work, and with this vision, like to have this implemented in the next period of time. And I hope that we will get the needed attention and support from education actors, donors, and international NGOs to start sharing this vision with us and be more accountable to local communities and affected population. So let me take this like to you again, Haima. Do you have any like final thoughts or like specific asks for attendees today to start working on, or maybe share them broadly with their donors and their colleagues at work?
Yeah, I would also like thank Qutaiba again for his hopeful thoughts for the future. Um, the model, as I mentioned, is still under development. So, of course, any experience is needed to develop this model and push it forward. We would need experts in education sector and in good governance. We would need, of course, more women to be involved in the decision making, taking into account that education sector has many women workers. So this model or mechanism, of course, facilitates the engagement and participation of these women in the decision making, especially when we're talking about policies and that would affect their daily lives and their work experience. Um, we, of course, need a positive engagement from the donors, big NGOs working in the sector, or donor countries who could push these ideas, these values, these standards forward with their relevant partners and in their different geographic areas where they implement their interventions. We hope this body is trusted by both donors and the local communities. So it could be like a step or a first step towards more models that take the ideas and the views of the local communities and put them in the centers when setting the priorities. My colleagues all mentioned how the priorities and the needs and the plans for funding of the sectors are now designed. And I would say also like working on a local level is a key factor to have more sustainable outcomes of these activities. When asking the teachers and the children parents about what they think the priority now, we would get honest answers that would help us design programs that would have sustainable outcomes, hopefully in the future. So this would be my final ask, like more engagement by the donors into adopting similar approaches and models.
Thank you very much. I do share this ask with you, and I hope that it is loud and clear for all the participants who may get the chance to either like present on Brussels or get in touch with some of the donors who are working on education and share our thoughts with them. Maimuna, last but not least, let me get to you with the same question. Any specific ask that you want us to take with us out of this panel?
Thanks, Riyad. I would like to thank you. I thank my colleague Qutaiba and Haima and the audience. And I finally call you to remember whenever we are working towards solutions for Syrians, participation in solutions planning is the key. We need to make sure that the children, their parents, and wider community are consulted, are given the space to express themselves and actively be able to choose the solutions which better suits their needs. We need to trust the affected people. They know the problem better than us, and thus they better know the solution. Lastly, I want you to trust that opportunities to work do exist. Our hope of a future where children are safe, well, and educated is alive, and your support would be invaluable to reach there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maimuna, for being inspiring as always. And unfortunately, since we couldn't have Mr. Omar with us today, we get to end our discussion early. Maybe I can open the floor now for any questions or interventions. Feel free to either write them through the Q&A function, or if you'd like to speak, just raise your hand and I will give you the ability to speak on the panel. I can see that there is one question regarding the education strategy. And yes, I believe we can share that through email. We do have your emails through registration form. So we will make sure to send the strategy after the webinar. So any questions?
And Riyad, sorry, just to jump in here.
Please.
So, yeah, as you said, the strategy can be shared with all the participants via email. In addition to that, on upcoming June, the same actors will meet again to develop their own long-term strategy for the education sector. So the chance is still open for any education actor if they wanted to participate or to support the efforts of those local structures. And so as I guess it's on June, and who interested, we can share with them the more information and the invitation for the workshops of the strategy development.
Yeah, thank you so much, Taiba. I believe we can share here on the chat. If Leila, you can share your email on the chat so people can know whom to reach out for in case they would like to participate or get more information. But yes, the effort is like collective. We need to all work on this. So whoever feels that they would like to contribute and they would have something to add, please do come get in touch with us. This is Leila's email on the chat now. Feel free to reach out to her. So last chance for any questions or interventions. Okay, I would like to thank you all for your time and especially to thank our panelists, Maimuna, Qutaiba, Haima, and also Omar, who couldn't be with us today. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts and being inspiring. Thank you for waking up every day with like holding this burden and trying to search for a better future for Syria through thinking about education and children, as I believe they are the future, and they would be able to change whatever reality that we are living today. So thank you all, and we count on your support and efforts during Brussels and after Brussels in empowering and restructuring the education sector inside of Syria. Thank you all, and I hope to see you again